Doctors of Reddit. What is your most heartbreaking diagnosis? Dentist here. 18-year-old kid needed either dentures or 30K for a full mouth of crowns. He had genetic enamel hypoplasia, leading to soft enamel, and his teeth had eroded to little nubs. When I presented this info to him and his parents, they laughed at the idea of spending that much on his teeth and said, well, looks like we are letting them fall out and getting you dentures later. He seemed genuinely distraught. I felt pretty sad about the case, so I called them a few days later, offering to do the case as charity, and I would charge nothing. They said they would consider it, but never called me back. I tried following up, and they didn't return my calls. This was a year ago, and I think about it a lot. I'm an anesthesiologist, and I had to talk with a patient about anesthesiology risks. The patient was an orphan, 11 years old. Normally, I talk to parents when it comes to children. But this one gutted me because I read the patient's documents and her dad had an accident at work and is mentally impaired, and her mother left her to go back to her home country. She came with two workers from the orphanage who were hardly 20. Basically 3 kids in my eyes. Until this point, I never thought about orphans needing medical care because it never dawned on me. But goddamn, I needed a pause after this. I do a lot of trauma, and telling parents that their kid died due to stupid decisions is no fun. Lately, we had a lot of kids die from climbing on top of trains and getting electrocuted, so please stop doing that. Not a doctor, but a mom to a kid who is now a survivor of an aggressive form of leukemia, diagnosed at 13. While being told your kid has cancer was literally like being punched in the gut, the absolute worst part was telling my kids. My kid with cancer knew something was off as she wasn't feeling well for a little while, but couldn't really put her finger on it. She was not that sick when diagnosed. The cancer was discovered when we took her in for something else. Her 10-year-old brother had no idea there was a problem. It is a special shitty level of hell to have to answer, I don't know, when your 10-YO asks if their older sister's going to die, or explain to a 13-YO who has the right to know and is fully capable of understanding just how bad things are expected to get, or have to ask your teenager if there is anything they want to do before they get a bone marrow transplant, knowing that once we go in for transplant, there is a chance they are never coming home alive again. My dad is an oncologist. He told me about a woman who declined treatment because her husband threatened to leave her if she lost her hair. He was the only family she had, and she didn't want to lose him. My dad tried to reason with her. He asked if he could talk to her husband, who didn't come to the few appointments she attended. But she refused and disappeared for about 6 months. Then she came back because she had begun to physically decline and her husband had left her. She wanted treatment since she had nothing left to lose at that point, but the disease was too far gone and she didn't make it. She was 25. That's definitely one of the more devastating and infuriating stories he's told me. Guys who got told no during a failed marriage proposal. What happened afterwards? My 7th grade teacher brought his GF to school to propose to her in front of our entire class, and she said no. It was the topic of discussion almost every day that year. He ended up moving schools at the end of the year. My mom's boyfriend proposed to her 3 months into dating. She was 40, had one disastrous marriage and subsequent divorce under her belt by that time, and felt like it was too soon in the relationship to be talking marriage. He accepted her. No, but said he wouldn't ask again, and he hasn't. They've been together 25 plus years now, and never married. My ex did something similar. He pressured me into visiting with his family for Christmas in 2022. At that time, we had only been seeing each other for literally 2 months, so I told him I thought that it was a little too soon. He badgered and pressured me into it until I felt so bad that I felt like I couldn't say no. He told me that his mother had already bought Christmas gifts for me, and how could I say no to his mother? Anyway, he proposed a couple of months later, and I initially told him that again, I thought it was too soon. In fact, I tried to end the relationship. He again pressured me and talked to me down, and stupid me thought that we could work through it. I ended up leaving him about 6 months later. He became extremely controlling and verbally abusive. No surprise there given how he was acting in the beginning. I literally had to sneak away to get away from him. That was about a year ago. We'd been joking around about it for months. I'd ask sarcastically in the most unromantic way. She'd say no. We'd laugh and move on with our day. I'd apparently conditioned her so well that when I asked for real, she flippantly turned me down, and everyone around me either gasped or got this real awkward look on their face. She changed her tune shit quick when she actually looked and saw me holding the ring. We've been married 17 years now. Good times. My childhood best friend's parents also have a story regarding proposal conditioning. One of them had a row boat they'd use to hang out on the water all the time. One day he brought a fake ring, proposed, and then accidentally dropped the ring in the lake. They laughed, whatever. He did it a second time. Then he brought the real ring for a real proposal. She was onto him, grabbed the ring, and tossed it in the lake. They've been married for like 100 years, so it ended fine. But he sort of deserved that. I hope he got insurance on the ring. Not my own experience, but I was in the restaurant when a failed proposal happened. Somehow the guy was able to get the families involved in this fancy dinner without the girl's knowledge as to what was going to happen. He orders their drinks, where he had the ring cleaned and then placed at the bottom of her pina colada drink. She gets up and goes to the bathroom, and that's when some of her family moved in close with their cameras, phones, ready for the proposal. She comes back and the drinks are brought. She refuses the drink, much to his dismay, but I don't get the hint. She doesn't want it. You should have your drink, it's really good. She again says no. This goes on, back and forth. Finally, she says no and is disturbed by his pushy behavior. I hear this from my table. I can't marry someone who won't respect my boundaries. She gets up and walks out of the restaurant. The guy sits there waiting for her to cool off. She doesn't come back in, so he fishes out the ring and has the drinks taken away. She comes back in near the end, and he shows her. The ring tells her it was in the drink, and she slaps him and says no. This time she is angry and leaves. Everyone packs up and heads to pay. He just sits there by himself. I wanted to get up and say something, but my date was ready to go home. Was with a girl for a couple years. I started talking about getting married. She was up for it, but kind of distant about it. I take her out ring shopping and she breaks down. Tells me she can't marry me. I was really confused. I thought things were going great. Turns out I was just the guy taking care of her until her ex gets out of prison. I paid for her schooling and helped her get off drugs. We were looking at houses. I thought we were making a life together. She left me not long after that. He got out of prison a few months later. She went back to adult work. I ran into them a few times. I guess she's happy. How is your, if we are single by 30, we're getting married, friend doing? Had a married at 40, optioned on, lost contact with her for a few years, and had started to rebuild our friendship. She'd got married and moved away, but was in the process of splitting up and remembering her old life, had arranged to go and see her in her new flat. Big night out planned, but then contact suddenly stopped again. Found out about 6 months later that she'd had a car crash and died instantly. Her still husband hadn't told any of her old friends what had happened. She was the first one from our friend group that had died. It hit hard. Still think of her often and the mischief we got up to in our late teens. Not me, but I have a former coworker that made that pact with his senior high school prom date. Lost touch for 7 or so years. Reconnected at the 10-year high school reunion. Got married 2 years later. Now 2 kids with a third on the way and very happy. It was cool to watch the majority of that story go down. With us it was, if we are still single at 65, let's just move in together. At least we like each other. We met in our first year at university and had been close friends ever since. She passed away of breast cancer at 63. Miss her every day. This is actually my time to shine. I met Lisa when I was in high school through a mutual friend. Lisa lived about 4 hours, but we kept in touch by writing letters. This was in the 1980s. We met up for a spring break trip at the beach and got along well since we hadn't seen each other in several years. We both went to different colleges and dated on and off some during our college years. After college we dated then. She went to Germany for 3 years. We'd see each other casually when she'd come home, but nothing serious. When she came back home from Germany, we started seeing each other again. We made a pact that if we were not married by 30, we'd get married. We drifted apart a bit at 29 years old and we were both dating other people. She ended up marrying the person she was dating, and I ended up marrying the person I was dating. We both went to each other's weddings with our respective SOs. We'd meet as couples and go to dinner sometimes, and once vacation together for a long weekend. Our kids went to the same school for a while too. Then we lost touch for about 5 years, until one day I ran into Lisa at a local Starbucks. I heard someone call my name, and it was Lisa. We hugged and caught up for a while. I then asked her how her husband was doing, and she said they split up about a year ago. She asked about my wife, and I told her we split about 10 months ago. We looked at each other, and I asked her if she'd meet me for coffee the next day, and she immediately said yes. We dated for several years and got married in December 2021. She's been living a wild life. We made the pact at 22, she got married by 24, divorced by 25, new relationship and got pregnant at 26, married at 28, and divorced at 30. In that time, she dropped out of college, went back to college, completed her associates, got nailed for a few drug charges, and is currently fighting for custody of her kid with the dad. This actually did happen for a friend of mine and his wife, but it was more of a conversation along the lines of, hey, remember that pact we made when we were 18 about getting married at 30 if we were both single? Well, we are now 30 and single. Did you want to give dating a shot? 5 years later, and they are now happily married. I have no idea why they didn't give dating a shot years before, but that's none of my business. We both got married before 30 to other people. She married a cool dude and had 4 kids. They had a beautiful family, and so do I. I was genuinely happy for her and glad we didn't end up with each other. She died of cancer a few years ago when her youngest kid was still in elementary school. My heart breaks for her and her family. I feel closer to them than they realize because I knew her since middle school. I think of them often and hope they are finding peace and happiness in this crazy life. We made the pact at 15 as a joke. We finished high school, college, and moved into early adulthood while he dated other people. I was single until 23 when I met my match, who I'm still with to this day. This year he broke up with his girlfriend because he said he loved me and couldn't be friends anymore because it was too hard for him. It sucks, but I wish him the best. People who are 40 plus and happy with their life, what is your advice to people in their 20s? It's never too late to start again. All in my 20s, I thought I couldn't just restart my career or dump a useless boyfriend or go back to school because I was already on a certain trajectory. Made my choices now. I gotta make the best of it. That's total bullshit. You have no idea how incredibly young you are and how much time you have to do whatever you want to do. When I figured this out, I found the man of my dreams, had a kid in my late 30s, dropped my entire career in my late 40s, and starting a new one at 50, and it's awesome. Maintain your friendships. In 20 years, you will be so grateful for those people who saw you through marriages, children, illness, and health. People who will go for a trip with you, love your kids, remember you as a young person. Friends are essential, but they require work. Don't be alone just because you don't want to be the person who reaches out to others. When I was in college, I had the chance to go to Europe, but I passed because I had to work at a warehouse. I picked staying at a part-time warehouse job overseeing the world. When I finally went abroad in my 30s, it changed my perspective about everything and everyone. Go to another country that is far away and different from your own. When I was in college, I had the chance to go to Europe, but I passed because I had to work at a warehouse. I picked staying at a part-time warehouse job overseeing the world. When I finally went abroad in my 30s, it changed my perspective about everything and everyone. Go to another country that is far away and different than your own. Don't put yourself in ridiculous amounts of debt trying to portray a certain image. You'll spend your entire life trying to get out of the hole you dug, or you'll have to declare bankruptcy. Set aside enough money to cover 3 or 6 months of expenses for emergencies just like now. Moreover, save now for your retirement years. It doesn't require much, and if you have it taken directly from your paycheck, you won't be inclined to not pay yourself first. Take care of your body. Exercise to maintain a healthy weight and good cardiovascular health. As you get older, it's much harder to maintain these. Enjoy the days of your youth without going overboard. There is nothing wrong with having a good time. Yet if you are always waking up wondering what happened last night, why you can't remember how you spent so much money, or you always have a hangover, you should tone it down a bit. Don't take advice or criticism as a personal attack. Most times the people who care about you have observed behavior in you, which is off-putting, doesn't reflect who you really are or could be, or would make you a more rounded person. Figure out what is important to you in life. A shocking amount of people never do this. The sooner you do, the better off you will be. It is important to me to be able to take care of myself and have enough left over to support those I love. If I'm doing that, it is hard to get down, or be worried, or care what other people think of me, etc. I'm still going to pursue my career and other interests. I just don't have anything emotionally riding on their successes, at least not in relation to my own sense of self-worth. I'm not doing a fun job or an inspiring job. I'm doing on that pays the most for the least work. For me, that's okay because with the excess time, I can spend it with people I love. With the excess money, I can help pay for my friends who didn't get to go to college to do it now. I can take time off at a drop of a hat to fly across the country and help in a family emergency, etc. There is the phrase, live so God can use you. I'm not religious, but I do value the idea of setting your life up. So when an opportunity to do something that you care about, that matters, arises, you're in a position to do it. Figure out what you want for yourself and what you want for others. It will make planning and achieving it easier. What happened to the most attractive person in your high school/college? She was voted best looking and married the guy who was voted best looking. That was 34 years ago, and they're still married, still good looking, and just great people all around. Hottest guy at my school became a fairly successful dealer in college. We're not talking pot, dude was dealing hard drugs. He would even supply his own sister. Their parents weren't in the picture. When we asked him why, he said, I have paid for her to go to rehab 3 times. It doesn't stick. And if I don't give it to her, I know she'll be out there using men to get it. At least this way I can somewhat limit what she's taking until I manage to get her off it. I could kind of see his logic. I had a huge crush on the best looking guy in our school. He was always friendly with me too. But anytime we were talking and his teammate best friend came across us, the friend would start mocking when insulting me. It was so overt, my sister suggested the friend had a secret crush on me, because why else was he so obsessed with teasing, insulting me for no reason? Yeah, it wasn't me he had the crush on. Apparently my crush and his teammate friend are now in a relationship. No clue if it started in high school or after. Currently scrolling Reddit. I'm not a narcissist. I was just homeschooled. We had a guy who looked like an actual Greek god, star athlete, the works. Effing Adonis, actually. He bulked up even more after he joined the police force and eventually the SWAT team. He lost his godly hair and is completely bald, but the look works just fine with his physique. She was the best-looking girl in school. I am not the best-looking guy, but we became friends in grade 11. She said she didn't want to date anyone. But at the end of grade 11, we started casually dating. Fast forward 15 years, we own a house, are married, have 2 awesome dogs, and are trying for kids. As far as I'm concerned, she has only gotten better looking. Housewife. She married a rich older guy, but not that old. Hears that she is content. No social media, but meets up with her closest school friends often. So we get her updates secondhand. She has always been humble and nice, and looks like she is still that way. For those who have careers that keep them out at sea for long periods of time, what is the creepiest thing you've seen out in the water? Not so much creepy as eerie, but being out in the blue at night in a lightning storm and a slack wind. The ocean was very flat, no big rolling swells, just tiny little ripples. The whole world would be black, and then there would be a flurry of bolts, and the whole world would be silver. The ocean looked like nothing so much as aluminum foil that had been scrunched up and flattened out. The water looked like mercury, and all the little ripples made these very dramatic black shadows. This sort of qualifies. Former Navy here. Somewhere off the coast of Italy, saw a very, very small boat, not much bigger than a rowboat, about 9 or 10 miles offshore. This was sometime around midnight. There was no light from land and no other ships around. It had a light. Our ship captain said it was a fisherman, and the fish would be attracted to the light at that time. Imagine being in a rowboat about 10 miles offshore in the middle of a pitch-black night, waiting to see what finds you. I used to be an oil field diver in the Gulf of Mexico. I'd say about 80% of the dives I logged were at night, mostly 500 FT and under DSVs. It's very eerie feeling sitting on the downline doing in water decompression in the middle of night. I'd always ask topside to turn off my headlight, like a worm on a hook, just bobbing in the darkness. Some 20 years ago, on the MV Explorer, since sunk, down near the Antarctic Circle, sailing around the bergs and occasionally making landfall, we rounded into a small bay area, and there amongst the ice and coast was an unmarked sailing yacht, which is odd as generally yachts have some identifying markings on them. To add to it, they didn't respond to any radio contact, and whilst I wasn't privy to the conversation, and it was a long time ago, some crew went across via Zodiac and were refused boarding. So basically a yacht, not a particularly large one, that was unmarked was hanging around in the inhospitable waters of the Antarctic and didn't want any help or contact. Proper weird. I was about 2 kilometers offshore Western Australia kayak fishing in the middle of nowhere. Knocked a rod overboard and didn't hesitate to take off my life jacket to dive in and get it. I chased it down a good distance before giving up. When I got back to the surface, the kayak was now a good 15-20 meters away, thanks to way more wind present than I'd realized. I barely managed to swim back to it, giving everything I had as it continued to get blown away. Was very nearly the end for me that day over a stupid fishing rod and a rash decision. Doctors have read it. What's it like when you go in for a doctor's appointment? I was at a lecture a couple of years ago, performed by two doctors who'd undergone treatment for breast cancer and written a book about it together. I remember her talking about her diagnosis. She was a breast cancer surgeon herself. You couldn't make it up. She walked into the room, saw her own scans with the doctor, and her heart dropped. She barely heard a word he said because she couldn't stop the flood of information she was getting. Looking at the scans, she knew if she'd need surgery, chemo, radiotherapy, how long it would be, what her estimated survival was. I don't think they discussed it like a group project, but I suppose she couldn't stop herself from listening to her own internal monologue since it was her own field. I remember her saying she'd found it, in hindsight, an incredible learning opportunity regarding how to interact with patients, and that she thought about it a lot. It depends on what I'm going in for. As a background, I'm an oncologist, so I've trained in internal medicine before. For most internal medicine type stuff, I don't bother going in unless I need something that I can't easily get for myself, e.g. labs or images. For specialty stuff I wasn't trained in, I go in and try to give them the best history I can, but let them do their own thing. I don't get involved in the management. I let the doctors seeing me lead that, unless they miss something huge and I would just double check. The main difference is I can present the whole history and relevant info in about 30 seconds flat, and the doctor with that info can just give me the management plan in about the same time. Fastest consultations ever. Very methodical. Doctor here, neurologist. I'm not good at going to the doctor. I don't go often, but when I do, I usually just shut up, especially if it's a field of medicine I have no idea about, like, say, derm. That being said, the doctor usually knows I'm a physician as well, and so the language terms to be more technical. I also find that we practice less defensively with each other since we can be more open. We could do ABC tests, but honestly, what you probably have is X, so take this, and if it doesn't get better, then we can do ABC. My mom's a GP, and she usually just self-diagnoses most of the time, but will sometimes get a second opinion. She doesn't really go to another doctor, just calls them to ask about stuff. Her contacts are filled with all kinds of doctors. It's like a secret underground community. For stuff like getting ultrasounds, etc., they discuss stuff like it's a group project. People who quit their jobs on the first day, what was your I'm out of here moment? Not technically the first day, but the second day. When I was 20 or so, I got hired to be a temporary floor member for Forever 21 during the holiday season. My training started a week before Black Friday, so the store was already kind of in chaos. On my first day of training, I walked in, and the floor manager gave all the new hires a tour, showing us the facility and layout of the store. After this, I was assigned to a veteran floor member to shadow and get an idea of what my job was and what my duties would be. As soon as I was assigned, the manager dipped, never to be seen again. An hour and a half into my shift, my shadowy got an emergency family call and had to take off for a week. When this happened, I found some other floor manager and explained the situation and asked them who else I should shadow. The manager's response was, "Just do what you can by yourself, you'll be fine. Everyone else is busy." Figured, well, okay, I'll try. I don't know if any of you have shopped in the women's section of Forever 21, but during seasonal sales, they will have multiple articles of clothing that all look almost exactly the same but with slight differences. A white cardigan with 4 buttons that looked literally the same as a white cardigan with 5 buttons. The best part was these different items were often placed in completely separate parts of the store, and it was the job of the dressing room to return the unpurchased items to the correct section, so the employees could put them back on the shelves. Well, these employees effing sucked, and I didn't know if they were a part of my section or not, so I'd spend a ridiculous amount of time trying to find where they go before realizing, wait, this isn't even my section. I've checked literally every rack. So I'd put it back on the sorting rack and move to the next item. More than 50% of the stuff I was told to reshelf wasn't my section. I just did as best as I could and got ready for my next miserable day. The next day I come in and the store manager pulls me to her office and tells me how slow I was the day before. And if I want to keep working here, I need to be very fast. I explained my lack of training and unfamiliarity with the store, and she told me if I didn't know where the clothes were in sections, I should come in my free time and memorize where stuff was at. I spent the rest of my shift putting clothes in random effing places, then never came back for a third shift. F that place and their management. I used to work at a craft store as a cashier, but quit when I moved. Ended up going back a couple of years later to make some extra cash, but this time in the framing department. During the interview, they swore up and down I would only ever be a backup cashier because I said I refused to have full cashier shifts. First shift after the interview is listed as framing, but I'm put on cash and told that actually most of my shifts would be cash since they'd found someone else for framing. I spent the next 6 hours giving everyone who came to my register 20% off of everything and then never went back. My first internship was at a Brazilian teen detention center. It's akin to a prison, but Brazilian law has some distinctions between crimes committed while as an adult or as a teenager. Teens go through socio-educational measures. I was walking through a courtyard with my supervisor when some doctors came running, flailing their arms and screaming, while officers came running from the opposite direction. I get pulled by my supervisor, who just tells me to run back to our office. These teens as young as 12 had escaped their block. A few minutes later, an officer comes knocking on the doors of the offices and yelling for everyone to run outside because a fire had broken out. Some of the teens had set mattresses on fire in their cells. I didn't really nope out. My teacher did. She hadn't even been there that day. So I was forced by the university to choose another place to intern at. Oh well. Wasn't exactly the first day, but I didn't show up after the second shift. It was a rather popular cafe chain in my country. I was hired to work in the kitchen as a cook, along with another senior cook. Let's put aside the fact that I had zero cooking knowledge whatsoever. The senior cook was leaving the kitchen every 5 minutes to smoke. So there I am, alone in the kitchen. Orders are printing fast, and I'm standing there not sure what to do first, and the waitress comes over yelling at me to cook shit. I don't have any business cooking. Definitely not on my own. Later on, the senior cook told me they had at least 2 rats running around the kitchen. Showed me they pooped on a plate. I never came back, and I'm glad the place got shut down. Answered an ad in the paper. This was the mid-90s. What seemed to be an office job making sales calls when I was in college. Did a phone interview and was called back for an in-person interview. When I go to the interview, I'm led into a room with about 50 other people and a small stage at the front of the room. We're all somewhat confused as to what is going on. Finally, a guy gets on the stage and informs us that we've been selected for the opportunity to sell Cutco. Me and two-thirds of the rest stood up and walked out. Summer job working for a landscape architect. Got to the job site and he asked me to dig a hole in some rocky dirt. I asked for a shovel. He didn't have one. I asked for a hand spade. He didn't have one. He told me to just dig the hole with my bare hands, and then he drove off to another site, leaving me completely alone. I dug for a little bit and then said, "Fuck this," and left. Had the job specified that I needed to supply my own tools, I could have, but it didn't, and I wasn't going to work for somebody that expected folks to dig through hard, rocky soil with their hands. I was a cashier at Lowe's during college for less than a full day. I made it through the multiple day training, but there was so much stupid shit going on, I almost thought I was on a hidden camera show. All of the employees complained about how hard they had to work while simultaneously not getting enough hours. Nobody understood why they were hiring like 4 new people. I was one of those 4. Turns out it's because they were progressing through a sexual harassment complaint that required restructuring of the store and firing of some employees. This was known to HR and explained to new hires, against company policy, but wasn't known to the employees, apparently some of whom still worked there, including the fucking person doing the training. She was really inappropriate and said not to worry about the sexual harassment stuff, that everything would go back to normal soon enough and we wouldn't have to be so uptight. They fired her the day before I started, along with one of the cashiers who trained me. She also offered me terrible guidance for the application process. They were looking for part-time help, and 2 of the 3 days they needed help on, I had off from school. I told them I could work nights most nights, but if they needed daytime help, it had to be on those days. She said if I was too restrictive, they wouldn't keep me on, lied to my boss about my availability to make me even more attractive than I already was. Wink, and told me to schmooze them a bit and I'd make it further. She said in the end, it wouldn't impact anything, and I'd get those days. My first week's schedule, I was working mornings every day that I was in school, and I wasn't given any hours on my days off. Aside from the fact that I was given 2 times the hours the position called for, when other employees were shorted, my work schedule way literally impossible to consolidate with my school schedule. I only went to work on my first day to tell them I was quitting and that their application process was a fucking mess. They couldn't figure out how so much went wrong, and then they asked who trained me and everything made sense. They thanked me for at least showing up to quit, unlike the other 3 they hired, who just stopped returning their calls and no-showed their first days. What was the best "you have no power here" moment you have ever seen? I used to work for a super annoying manager when I worked at McDonald's. This guy was horrible to us. He was constantly bullying us, shit-talking us to customers, and doing everything in his power to make us miserable. Well, so many people complained about him that he ended up getting fired. New manager was great. He was super chill and understanding with us all. A couple weeks after he took over, the old douchebag comes in and starts talking about how terrible the store looks, how our service is shittier than ever, and how much this store needs him. The new manager looked at him and said, "If you don't leave, then the cops are going to make you." When the douchebag didn't move, the new awesome manager stuck to his guns and called the cops. The douchebag is no longer allowed on any McDonald's property in the city and has a restraining order against him. I told my ex I was getting remarried. He told me he was going to stop me and put a lien on my house, which I bought with my money 6 years after the divorce. My son would come home from visitations telling me how his dad was going to stop the wedding, and I'd have to pay him all of this money, la-di-da. Get to court. His attorney goes blah, blah, blah for what felt like forever. My lawyer, yes, I had to freaking get one, stands up and simply hands the judge the divorce papers showing the disbursement of funds and how my ex isn't owed anything. Judge looks at ex's lawyer and basically asks, "Did you even ask for this document before filing?" and dismisses the case. A while back, I got a job as a popcorn monkey in the local cinema as a temporary thing while I figured out what the F I was doing with my life. There was a supervisor that had worked there since the site opened, around 5 years, who was a total bitch and had had numerous complaints about her from countless staff. In the first week, I nearly quit because of her attitude. As an example, one night I was on a close, and basically cleaned the entirety of the front of house on my own. I stopped to take a drink of water, and she marched up to me going, "We don't pay you to stand around drinking, you know." To which I calmly responded that I was thirsty and needed a drink of water, and if she wanted to tell me I wasn't allowed to have a glass of water, then good luck. But I'm pretty sure health and safety would have something to say about that. She huffed about not having had a break all day, which I ignored 'cause not my fucking problem. But internally I was put out about it, because it was totally fucking pointless to be such a twat about things. About 2 weeks in, I get promoted to supervisor, as I was clearly extremely competent by their usual standards. I could walk and fart at the same time. But she also gets promoted to floor manager, so she continues to work her little power trips and try and lord it over me and everyone else. Weeks after that, I get another promotion to floor manager, and at this point we're equals, so she can't boss me around anymore. So instead, she tries a different tack, which is to try and lord it over me with her superior knowledge of processes, where to find stuff, etc. My response is to go, saccharine sweet. "Oh, thanks, that's so helpful. I mean, you know how things work so much better than me because you've been here 5 years, and I've only been here 6 weeks." She had a face like a smacked arse. It was delightful. We had an HR lady who was extremely power hungry. She is walking around with the president of the company who flew in from Japan. She rushes him though the warehouse, just spits out, "Oh, these are the warehouse guys. We don't have to stop and talk to them." He stops, walks over, and starts talking to me about my last vacation, how buying my house went. You could just see her fuming behind him as we talked for almost 45 minutes. I've had multiple meetings with him. We knew each other really well. When I was working customer service for a restaurant delivery service, not unlike DoorDash, I had a customer send in a complaint about hair in their food. The hair was sitting on top of the food. I checked their account, and they had one order on their account, which is a red flag. I checked their phone number and found multiple accounts, each with 1 or 2 orders, all of them complaining about hair in the food. I deny a refund because the customer has actually used the same identical photo for the last order since they ordered the same thing. The customer tries to argue with me, threatening to never use the service again. Typical stuff that they always say. Eventually, the customer gives up and ends the call, then immediately tries again. I get the support request, see who it is, then deny the refund again. She ends the call, then tries again. The person behind me gets the call. I tap the person on the shoulder and show them what I pulled up on my screen, and that person denies the refund. The next day, she calls back and tries again and is outside of the refund window, so the customer demands to speak to a supervisor. The supervisor bans her from the service for multiple fraudulent refund requests. I worked for 8 years servicing communications equipment on site. 5 of those years were as the department manager. When oil was found in our area, we got so busy we could barely even think. Most of my team were pulling 12-plus-hour days 6 days a week, and we were struggling to hire people quick enough. One day, the CEO texted and said he hired an assistant manager for me, which was something I desperately needed. I was dirty as hell from my previous job and swung by the store to pick him up and take him to one of our sites where he would be doing paperwork. The moment he got in the truck, he immediately started talking shit. He started telling me about how everything we were doing is fucked up, and the department manager was a total moron, and he would have my job within a few months. I just sat and mostly listened. He obviously didn't know shit about my industry, and every time he would say something wrong, I would try to politely correct him, and he'd either backtrack or insist that I was trained wrong. When we got to the site out in the middle of the West Texas desert, he complained about the layer of dust on everything and ordered me to clean up the entire site. When I sat down at my desk, the guy continued to bitch my ear off about everything that was wrong and chastised me for sitting down at my desk when he told me to clean up the site. So I called for a taxi, filled out a notice of termination, and handed it to him. He looked absolutely shocked. Then he defiantly protested that only could fire him. I said, "Right?" He sheepishly nodded, so I stuck my hand out for a handshake and introduced myself. I can teach anyone how to service equipment, but I don't have a clue how to teach someone to not be an asshole. A coworker friend of mine was flying back from a sales conference in Vegas, and he was able to upgrade to a first-class seat. We had this bitch sales VP that was on the same flight. She was the snobby, entitled type with a full-time nanny and giant McMansion in the suburbs, and she generally treated people who worked for her like servants. She sees him in a first-class seat as she's making her way to coach and asks him how he got that seat. He used points to upgrade. As people are getting settled in, she makes her way back up to the first-class cabin and asks to speak with the lead flight attendant. She tells him that one of her underlings is sitting in first class and that she needs to switch with him since she's higher on the corporate ladder. The guy can't believe what he's hearing, but she won't take no for an answer. Finally, he tells her she has to go back to her seat, or she will be escorted from the plane. She made a complete ass of herself in front of the whole first-class cabin. I had a rough childhood with a drug addict father. My mom struggled to make ends meet, and my first job was paying for the mortgage. After several months of working, again at my first job, I finally had some money to spend on myself and decided to get a computer and a decent internet connection. At the time, the best internet I could buy as part of a dish combo package. I bought a dish and brought it home to install on the house. During this time, my dad was still living at home with us, but he was hardly there, and my parents had all but separated at that point. My dad promptly asked me what I was doing by putting a dish on his house. I let him know that I pay the mortgage now, and I make the decisions on what we do with the house. I was young, but it was a very empowering moment for me. Therapists have read it. What was your biggest, I know I'm not supposed to judge you, but holy shit moment? Okay, real therapist here. I got one. Some of my clients are shockingly bad at giving themselves credit. Holy shit. Like they might get a nearly straight-A GPA and a brutal major while battling depression, or overcome years of phobia and get behind the wheel again, or write a literal novel, or raise a kid as a single parent with low income, or build new relationships after being burned, or cope with OCD well enough to hold down a job. And they'll talk about themselves as if everyone on earth is better than them, as if their accomplishments are worthless. And I know it's because of depression or anxiety or another condition, but I'm often stunned by how differently I see them compared to how they see themselves. I work in mental health and have worked in acute and crisis settings for the majority of my career. The most notable event I experienced was when a young person had presented with significant ongoing suicidal ideation who was dealing with a lot of shit. I spent a lot of time with them, mostly de-escalating and working out what the plan should be moving forward. One of their parents came in a little while later, and I had the opportunity to speak to them about where their child was and what had been going on, with their consent, of course. Midway through me trying to explain some of the psychological constructs and ways the parents could help, they said to me, "Is this going to take much longer? I have a show to go and watch." All I can say is, I never judge my patients. I have never walked their path or viewed the world through their eyes. But the people around them who perpetuate the suffering of the people I work with through ignorance, malice, and selfishness, I judge them. When I was underage, I got caught with a drink on Bourbon Street and got a minor in possession. I was telling my therapist about it and said that the police caught me with a hand grenade in New Orleans. He didn't realize that a hand grenade was a type of drink, and it was funny to watch him try to process that his patient might have just casually told him that he had been caught with a fragmentation grenade. He took a big long pause and said, "Where did you even find a grenade?" I realized the misunderstanding quickly and corrected him. But for a moment, he definitely was thinking, holy shit, how do I deal with this? I work with youth and adolescents who have anxiety, trauma, and/or depression. Some of the kids I worked with had some pretty severe attachment issues. Regardless of this, I never thought I'd have to seriously explain: 1, you can't just buy a straitjacket for your kid. 2, feeding your kid ultra-spicy ramen each night instead of the meal everyone else is eating isn't specifically defined as abuse, but you have to understand the emotional abuse that this causes. 3, your kid isn't trying to kill you because they stand in your doorway at night crying. That's likely because they're scared of their traumatic nightmares, but feel like you will just yell at them if they wake you up. Here's my most recent one. As the pandemic worsened here in the US and more lockdowns are on their way, one of my most extroverted clients and I brainstormed ways to meet her social needs while remaining safe. The following week, she canceled her session and told me that she's positive for COVID after attending an orgy, which definitely wasn't one of our ideas. I let out the deepest, most defeated sigh after I hung up the phone. Can I answer from the other side? I had something close to a mental breakdown after a painful breakup. Started seeing a therapist. It was going more or less well. At one point, I had a sort of revelation about all my bullshit and about my own responsibility in the whole mess. So next session, I'm actually thrilled to share this with the therapist about how I finally see a bunch of my own problems in the way I interact with women and which caused a relationship that wasn't really healthy from the get-go. I'm halfway through trying to explain this and the therapist goes, "Oh, women are weird." So that was that. I never went back F that guy. Redditors who messed around and found out, what did you find and do you regret it? About 6 years old, having a picnic with my dad by the lake. Some ducks wander up near us. Dad says, ducks will bite you. That's silly. They don't even have teeth. Stick your finger out and see for yourself. Got bit. Cried. When I was 14, I had a friend that was a track athlete. This kid was seriously the fastest person I've seen in real life. It had been raining for 3 days and we were mostly stuck inside and bored. When the rain finally stopped, I called him and we met up at the canal in between our houses. It was our usual meeting spot as it was halfway. He had the bright idea that we should cross the canal. That was at max capacity and moving very quickly, by jumping from one concrete footing to the next. Mind you, these were about 10 feet apart but very wide. I was not interested in that. Truth is that I was scared but didn't want to show it. He decided to jump from one to the next. He barely made it and declared how easy it was. At this point, the foolish pride kicks in and I make a run for it. I was comically short of making it across, so short that I hit face first into the side of the concrete footing and broke my nose. What's worse is that now I was in rapidly moving floodwater with my eyes blurry from breaking my nose. This track athlete buddy hopped on his bike and pedaled from that bridge to the next one and beat me there. I was desperately trying to grab onto the shore and pull myself up, but it was so wet and muddy that all I did was slow myself down a bit. He climbed down the embankment by the next set of concrete footings and started yelling at me to grab his hand. I did, and he pulled me out. He absolutely saved my life that day. But also my bike, that was left on the other bridge, was stolen by the time we got back to it. I used to think I was a tough guy and talked a lot of shit about how I could kick my roommate's ass if I wanted to. He politely challenged me to a boxing match. I took 2 hits but didn't get a serious one in. I went down. In retrospect, he was way cooler about it than he should have been. I was talking a lot of shit and he brought out boxing gloves and even some foam helmet things. I went down like a bitch LOL. I firmly believe that every shit talker needs a good-ass kicking once in a while, because that shit humbled me and I'm a better man for it. If you're out there, Isaac, it's Jibs and I'm still sorry for talking shit, lol. On a construction site, I didn't want to be a baby and take the stairs down the 3 flights to get to the can. Figured I could just climb down the scaffolding like a real man. The first step onto the metal piping was fine. The dew on the second step caused my foot to slip. I fell, hitting my chin on the way down, smashing my shin about halfway down, and bounced off something hard just as I hit the ground, luckily feet first. I also learned that there was another actual working bathroom on the 2nd floor. A boy in elementary school was harassing me and said, "What are you going to do about it? Hit me? I'm wearing glasses so you can't." So I took his glasses off his face, stomped them, and punched him in the face. My 5th grade self regretted it because I had to pay for his glasses by working odd jobs all summer, but my 42-year-old self pats that kid on the back all the time for doing it because that dude never messed with us again. What do you know is true without evidence? What are you certain of? Right down to your bones, without proof. Back when I was 10, there was a competition for school kids to write a treatment for an episode of Doctor Who, with the best one being developed into a full episode in the next series, and the winner receiving a writing credit. I was a huge fan of DW at the time, and the competition was actually run through schools, so my teacher made the entire class do it. But I was very excited. I began writing a story about the Doctor landing on a planet full of defective Cybermen whose programming had gone awry and had been left on this asylum planet to rot. The doctor lands there in response to a mysterious distress call from a woman and attempts to find and save her while avoiding the dangerous dysfunctional Cybermen and the looming threat of planetary destruction at the hands of the normal Cybermen. I finished my short treatment and gave it to my teacher to submit. Unfortunately, it turned out the competition was very strict about the formatting of submissions, and mine was returned because I had used the wrong formatting in some way. It seemed like a weird reason. I was a bit disappointed, and that was the end of that. But then, a year or two later, there was an episode of DW called Asylum of the Daleks, which seemed incredibly similar to my story except with Daleks. So incredibly, eerily similar, in fact, that to this day I am absolutely convinced that Stephen Moffat saw my script and came up with a formatting excuse so that he could remove me from the competition, steal my story, change the bad guys, and claim it as his own. I have zero evidence. I don't even still have the treatment I wrote or any letter from the BBC about my submission, and yet I know in my bones that Stephen Moffat stole his script from 10-year-old me. Back when I was 18, I got my first tattoo, the Squaresoft logo on my upper arm. It was 2001, and I was also on my own in a new state. I was and still am a huge RPG fan, and it's the height of my geekdom. Well, I sent in a picture of me and my tattoo with a short letter about me and my favorite games to Official PlayStation Magazine. They published my letter and photo along with the caption, "We don't know whether to be impressed or frightened." The very next month, they started a Tattoo of the Month section, and I am absolutely sure 100% that I either started that or was the story that proved the concept, the test. Unless someone can come from that team's time and tell me I'm not, I'll always believe I was the start of that. That gardening is the secret to happiness. Sounds super strange, especially coming from someone like myself, an ex-World of Warcraft gamer. I had kids, got busy with work, wanted out of the suburbs, got some land in the country, and started planting stuff. Years later, I have what I call a food forest. I have replaced lawns with fruit trees, bushes, vines, flowers, all woven together to mimic a natural forest, except everything in it is edible. It has changed my life completely. I just think there's something about being outside in the sun, feet on soil, hands in dirt, planting shit, watching it grow in the background of your life, going out and checking on it and watching how much bigger it is getting. Watch life, find it, and now you get to live with the natural world, not isolated from it. Birds making nests in your trees, frogs making home in your ponds, seeing bees all around your flowers, butterflies everywhere, rabbits and squirrels moving in, then owls moving in to eat those. It's this wonderful trophic cascade that you started, and it's incredibly rewarding. Plus, being able to just walk outside and get chemical-free, nutrient-rich dinner is amazing. You can see my food forest in my post history if anyone is interested in seeing what I'm doing. I actually think a big reason depression is such a big thing these days is because we have all become so disconnected from the life that we evolved in for the last 6 million years. We evolved walking around savannas and forests, pulling food off bushes and trees, out in the sun, feet in the soil, hands in the dirt. We couldn't be further from that, living inside our isolated homes, cars and offices. It's no wonder we're all so depressed. I think gardening is the secret to happiness. 100 years from now, only a handful of kids and grandkids will have any memory of my life. 200 years from now, at most, I'll be a photo in an old family scrapbook with my name in the margin space. 300 years from now, no one in my family will know I existed outside of a half-finished family tree. Yet ultimately, all of their hopes and pains, successes and failures, dreams and depressions will be the direct result of my having existed. So it isn't that bad.